The grand multi-million-dollar rebrand of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex has spectacularly hit rock bottom, forcing a desperate Meghan Markle to beg Netflix not just for a platform, but for a complete public relations rescue, even as her personal family dramas and embarrassing product failures mount. I'm glad you've joined me as we begin to unpick the layers of this rather extraordinary development. In the unforgiving world of global celebrity, where image is the absolute and only currency that truly matters, Meghan and Prince Harry have found themselves staring into a rather bleak, expensive abyss of their own making. For years, we have watched this couple attempt to orchestrate a high-stakes PR game that has been, to put it mildly, a spectacularly rocky ride fraught with missteps, hubris, and a profound, almost baffling lack of self-awareness. Recently, however, the narrative has shifted from mere annoyance to outright visible desperation, with persistent reports circulating that they are actively seeking help from the corporate communications arm of Netflix to somehow revamp their shattered image. It is a move that seems almost tragic in its transparency, given the absolute avalanche of negative press they have faced lately, much of it, as we all know, entirely self-inflicted. One must marvel at the irony of a couple who once believed the mighty Netflix PR machine could work miracles for them, completely failing to realize just how thoroughly they have burned through their elite connections in Hollywood and beyond. They demanded privacy, yet continually thrust themselves into the limelight, creating a paradox that has utterly exhausted the public and their corporate backers alike. According to a well-placed source, the atmosphere inside the gleaming, glass-walled conference rooms of Netflix headquarters has shifted from eager anticipation to a palpable, exhausted weariness whenever the Sussexes are placed on the agenda. In the early days, executives practically rolled out the red carpet, viewing the Duke and Duchess as the ultimate prize in the streaming wars, throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at the promise of royal prestige. But that initial starry-eyed fascination has rapidly dissolved into a pragmatic, intensely cold analysis of metrics, actual results, and constant public relations headaches that no corporate entity wants to manage. One can only imagine the inner monologue of these seasoned executives, sitting across from a duchess who reportedly still expects the deference of a working royal, while consistently failing to deliver the cultural cachet, the gripping content, or the viewership numbers to justify her exorbitant demands and sky-high production costs. The air in those meetings is reportedly thick with tension, punctuated by polite but firm pushback from a corporate entity that is no longer willing to quietly underwrite a never-ending vanity project. It appears the transition from valued, highly sought-after production partners to tedious, high-maintenance nuisances is absolutely complete, as the streaming giant adopts a ruthless stance of expectation for tangible returns on their vastly inflated capital investment. The couple is discovering, rather painfully and publicly, that in the brutal meritocracy of American entertainment, a royal title without universal public goodwill is merely a hollow prefix, and Hollywood's patience for unearned entitlement has firmly, undeniably run out. This corporate distancing is mirrored perfectly and rather tragically by the absolute chaos unfolding within their own notoriously unstable communications team, a situation that speaks volumes about the harsh reality of life inside the Montecito bubble. We are now looking at a staggering, almost comical statistic. Meghan and Harry are reportedly on their 11th or 12th PR team member since stepping back from their duties alongside King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine. This ceaseless revolving door of highly paid, deeply stressed staff members is not merely a string of unfortunate resignations or career changes. It is a glaring, unavoidable indictment of their management style and their fundamental inability to accept professional, realistic counsel. A source behind closed doors has whispered of the frantic, emotionally charged late-night phone calls the constantly shifting goalposts, and the sheer exhausting impossibility of managing a public image for clients who seem entirely disconnected from public sentiment. Imagine the profound anxiety of a seasoned Hollywood publicist, tasked with selling an illusion of effortless, compassionate royalty, only to be undermined at every single turn by the couple's tone-deaf pronouncements, petty grievances, and insatiable need for the spotlight. It begs a rather simple yet devastating question that everyone in the industry is currently asking. If one cannot even manage a handful of loyal staff members without triggering a mass exodus every few months, how on earth does one expect to manage a complex, globally scrutinized public image? The sheer arrogance required to constantly blame the staff for one's own horrific public reception is staggering, and it is a pattern that has not gone unnoticed by the very power brokers they are so desperate to impress. The desperation clinging to the Sussex brand is further compounded by the stark, undeniable reality that their desperate pivot to Netflix for pure image rehab is falling on conspicuously deaf ears. Behind the manicured hedges, the sprawling lawns, and the secure gates of their Montecito estate, the silence of the telephone not ringing with new, prestigious offers must be utterly deafening for a woman who once truly believed she would conquer and redefine the American aristocracy. Meghan's frantic, undoubtedly terrifying realization that the Duchess title no longer automatically opens the golden doors of A-list Hollywood is a bitter pill to swallow, particularly as she watches the genuinely powerful figures of the industry slowly, politely, but firmly distance themselves from her orbit. They have morphed from the most sought-after dinner guests in California to what industry insiders quietly but ruthlessly refer to as toxic assets, a deeply unflattering label that once applied in the vicious circles of Hollywood can stick for a decade or more, destroying future earning potential. The long-term consequences of this professional collapse are profound and far-reaching. They have successfully alienated the very establishment that initially welcomed them with open arms, leaving them stranded on an island of their own creation, surrounded only by a dwindling, ever-changing inner circle of paid sycophants. It is a spectacular, unprecedented fall from grace, driven not by the malicious intent of the press or jealous courtiers, as they so frequently and loudly claim, but by a tragic combination of soaring, unchecked ambition and an utter lack of the substance, grit, and humility required to sustain it. For a time, there was a prevailing, rather arrogant assumption emanating from the Sussex camp that the American public would simply swallow their narrative whole, entirely dismissing the nuanced traditions and quiet dignity upheld by King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of celebrity across the Atlantic, believing that endless victimhood could be profitably monetized without ever suffering a backlash from an audience that eventually demands authenticity and hard work. A source within the inner circle has suggested that Harry, in particular, was wholly convinced that leaving the constraints of the palace would result in universal adoration, free from the allegedly oppressive expectations of duty and stoicism. Instead, they have found themselves caught in a relentless, exhausting cycle of having to constantly justify their existence and their immense wealth, without the protective historical shield of the crown to legitimize their status. The American media, initially utterly charmed by the novelty of a rogue prince and his actress bride, has slowly adopted the very same cynical, questioning tone that the couple so bitterly despised in the British press. It is a fascinating, almost Shakespearean irony. In their frantic dash for absolute freedom and control over their own narrative, they have inadvertently become prisoners of a fickle entertainment industry that judges them solely on their last failing project, leaving them entirely vulnerable to the crushing weight of public apathy. As they frantically attempt to plug the gaping holes in their rapidly sinking professional ship, one cannot help but notice the glaring moral inconsistencies that have alienated the very demographic they so desperately need to win over. The irony of their current predicament is terribly rich and frankly rather difficult to ignore. While they demand understanding, grace, and total rehabilitation from corporate giants and the viewing public, they continue to exhibit a chilling lack of empathy in their own personal lives. A longtime family acquaintance has astutely noted that the disconnect between the compassionate, humanitarian, world-saving image Meghan tries so desperately to project on screen and her real-world actions behind the scenes has never been more jarring or transparent. It is this fundamental, inescapable hypocrisy that Netflix's elite public relations team is reportedly refusing to clean up, recognizing that absolutely no amount of glossy documentaries, carefully worded press releases, or staged paparazzi walks can mask the unappealing reality of their behavior. When the entire foundation of your personal brand is built on a very loud facade of universal kindness and familial healing, yet your own flesh and blood are treated with such startling, calculated coldness, the public invariably sees right through the charade. They have created a PR nightmare that no agency can fix, setting the stage for a personal drama that exposes the true nature of the inhabitants of that Montecito mansion. While the corporate overlords at Netflix ruthlessly tally their mounting financial losses and reconsider their bloated contracts, an even more profound and ultimately devastating failure is unfolding far from the gleaming boardrooms of California, one that strikes at the very heart of the Sussexes' carefully curated image of global benevolence. We must inevitably turn our attention to the glaring, almost uncomfortable moral vacuum that currently defines Meghan Markle's personal life, a situation so starkly devoid of basic human empathy that it leaves even the most hardened observers of this saga utterly bewildered. Thousands of miles away from the manicured, sun-drenched perfection of her Californian exile, her father, Thomas Markle, has reportedly been undergoing major, life-threatening surgery in a hospital in the Philippines, a development that adds a deeply tragic layer to an already fractured and highly publicized family dynamic. A well-meaning staff member has discreetly noted the surreal, almost chilling normalcy that pervades the Montecito mansion while this life-and-death drama plays out across the globe, painting a picture of deliberate, highly orchestrated ignorance. It is a tale of two entirely separate, irreconcilable worlds, one defined by the harsh, frightening reality of a serious medical crisis in a foreign land, and the other defined by a relentless, narcissistic pursuit of Hollywood relevance and brand synergy. The contrast is not merely unfortunate, it is a glaring indictment of a woman who has built an entire, immensely lucrative brand upon the pillars of compassion, familial healing, and emotional authenticity, yet seems entirely incapable of extending that same grace to the man who raised her. The physical and emotional atmosphere of these two contrasting realities could not possibly be more extreme, laying bare the absolute absurdity of the Duchess's current public posture for all the world to see. Imagine, if you will, the humid, undoubtedly stressful environment of a Philippine hospital ward, filled with the anxious murmurs of medical staff and the palpable vulnerability of an elderly man facing the profound uncertainty of major surgery without his daughter by his side. Juxtapose that harrowing, deeply human scene with the hushed, heavily air-conditioned, and sterile perfection of the Montecito living room, where Meghan is reportedly to be found casually sipping artisanal tea and obsessively curating her supposedly aspirational lifestyle brand. The silence echoing through those palatial Californian halls regarding her father's condition is nothing short of deafening. A deliberate, icy void that speaks far louder than any meticulously drafted press release or tearful television interview ever could. A source within the inner circle has expressed quiet disbelief at the sheer level of compartmentalization required to simply carry on with business as usual, organizing photo opportunities and lifestyle launches while entirely ignoring a parent's acute medical distress. This staggering detachment transforms the luxurious trappings of her Californian life, the expensive neutral tones, the imported linens, the endless private security patrols, into something resembling a beautifully decorated, emotionally barren fortress, designed solely to keep the messy, inconvenient realities of actual human obligation firmly locked outside. One is forced to wonder about the intense, silent mental gymnastics required to justify such a profound abandonment of a parent, especially when one's entire public existence is predicated on lecturing the rest of the world about kindness, emotional intelligence, and repairing generational trauma. In the quiet, unguarded moments of the night, when the cameras are absent and the paid sycophants have gone home, the inner monologue of a woman actively ignoring her father's mortality must be a deeply complex, perhaps entirely self-deluding narrative of perpetual victimhood. To maintain this incredibly rigid stance, she must continuously convince herself that her own perceived slights are so absolute, her past grievances so insurmountable that they completely absolve her of the fundamental, universal duties that instinctively bind children to their aging parents. It represents a terrifying hardening of the heart, a calculated decision to prioritize a long-standing public grudge over the basic instinctual urge to offer comfort to a seriously ill family member, a choice that fundamentally contradicts the empathetic persona she so desperately tries to sell to the American public. A longtime family acquaintance has sorrowfully observed that this unrelenting stubbornness is not a sign of modern strength or healthy boundaries, as her remaining supporters might fiercely argue, but rather a tragic inability to show grace, effectively trapping her in a perpetual state of anger and unresolved childhood resentment. The psychological toll of maintaining this flawless facade, of pretending that a major portion of her own history simply does not exist or matter, must be exhausting, inevitably bleeding into every other aspect of her fragile, heavily scrutinized professional life. Naturally, the strategy chosen to handle this glaring moral inconsistency has been a masterclass in denial, a resolute refusal to acknowledge the situation either publicly or privately, which only serves to highlight the utter ineptitude of her ever-changing, highly paid communications strategy. The remaining PR advisors, already beleaguered by failing Netflix deals and plummeting popularity polls, are left to navigate an impossible, gaping ethical hole, entirely unable to spin a narrative that can magically transform familial abandonment into an act of feminist empowerment or progressive self-care. They are keenly aware, even if their employer is not, that the public is entirely capable of seeing right through the smokescreen. Every time Meghan speaks of universal love, community support, or healing the world, the unspoken specter of her isolated, ailing father instantly renders her words entirely hollow and deeply cynical. A source behind closed doors suggests that any internal attempts by sensible staff to gently encourage a private olive branch, simply to mitigate the disastrous optics of the situation, are swiftly and fiercely shut down, revealing a deeply entrenched arrogance that refuses to yield to either common sense or common decency. This absolute unyielding denial is a catastrophic miscalculation in the court of public opinion, transforming what could have been a powerful, humanizing moment of quiet reconciliation into a permanent, undeniable testament to her unforgiving nature and her absolute prioritization of self over family. It is a devastating public relations crisis of her own making, one that cannot possibly be solved by a new luxury logo, a glossy magazine cover, or a carefully orchestrated appearance at a charity polo match. The long-term consequences of this particular moral failure are devastatingly permanent, particularly among the very demographic that constitutes the true backbone of any enduring, respectable public profile, those intelligent individuals who intrinsically understand the complex, undeniable weights of familial duty and obligation. For the silent majority of sensible, life-experienced women who watch these events unfold, women who have themselves navigated the difficult, often painful realities of caring for aging parents or managing fractured family dynamics, this behavior crosses an unforgivable line from mere celebrity gossip into a profound, unfixable character flaw. They recognize that while families are invariably complicated and difficult, there is a fundamental bedrock decency expected when a parent is facing the end of their life or serious illness, a decency that King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine have consistently demonstrated in spades, despite the immense, unparalleled pressures of their own royal existence. The stark, unavoidable contrast between the dignified, unifying presence of the royal family during times of national and personal crisis and the bitter, isolated, and profoundly selfish optics emanating from Montecito could not possibly be more pronounced or more fatally damaging to the Sussex brand. By choosing to coldly ignore her father's plight while simultaneously attempting to market herself as a global beacon of maternal warmth and societal healing, Meghan has permanently alienated the sensible, grounded audience she desperately needs to legitimize her endless commercial endeavors. Ultimately, this tragic tale of two entirely different worlds exposes the absolute, hollow core of the Sussexes' ongoing American experiment, revealing a brand that is entirely built on shifting sands, fragile egos, and empty, fashionable rhetoric. When a highly visible public figure's real-world actions so violently contradict their meticulously crafted public relations narrative, the resulting cognitive dissonance destroys any lingering trust or goodwill, leaving behind nothing but a cynical, heavily scrutinized shell of a celebrity. The complete destruction of her compassionate brand is not simply a temporary professional setback or the result of a coordinated media smear campaign, as they so often love to claim. It is the direct, unavoidable consequence of her own calculated choices, her own hardened heart, and her own relentless refusal to practice the very empathy she so loudly preaches to the masses. A well-placed source in the broader entertainment industry has noted that this specific lack of authentic humanity makes her incredibly difficult to market to mainstream corporate brands, as sponsors are naturally terrified of associating with a figure who is so widely perceived as cold, deeply ungrateful, and fundamentally disingenuous. The tragedy of Thomas Markle's lonely hospital room in the Philippines will forever cast a long, incredibly dark shadow over the manicured lawns of Montecito, serving as a permanent, quiet reminder to the world that all the Netflix millions and royal titles in existence cannot buy a clear conscience or repair a truly broken moral compass. As if the profound moral failings were not enough to permanently sink their reputation, we must now turn our gaze to the sheer commercial farce that has become of her lifestyle empire, a venture rapidly transitioning from highly anticipated to universally mocked. The absolute humiliation surrounding her product rollout is staggering, painting a picture of a brand quite literally dead on arrival before the public even had a chance to reject it. A source behind closed doors at a prominent production office has vividly described entire storage rooms packed to the rafters with unsold, rapidly languishing inventory. It is a scene of supreme indignity, where exhausted employees are reportedly being handed free jars of heavily branded jam simply as a desperate measure to clear valuable floor space. One can easily picture the atmosphere in those corporate break rooms, where the quiet mockery among staff members serves as a brutal focus group that highly paid PR executives simply cannot spin. The details emerging regarding the actual quality of these deeply pretentious offerings only serve to underscore the profound incompetence at the heart of the Montecito operation. We are hearing astonishing reports of a luxury candle arriving without a wick, an oversight so fundamentally absurd that it serves as the perfect metaphor for the Sussex brand. Incredibly expensive, heavily packaged, but completely lacking any functional spark. Furthermore, the culinary reviews of her signature marmalade have been nothing short of disastrous, with critics cruelly suggesting that forcing someone to eat a spoonful could effectively be utilized as a new form of interrogation. Deep within the confines of her meticulously decorated home, the realization that her highly touted golden touch is actually a toxic liability must be causing an absolute frenzy of inner turmoil and finger-pointing. The long-term consequences are severe. She has firmly cemented her status not as a formidable titan of commerce, but as an out-of-touch dilettante whose vanity projects are destined for the discount bins. This catastrophic collapse has invited a chorus of high-profile external verdicts, most notably from the unlikeliest of sensible voices, the musician Nicki Minaj, who has essentially articulated what the rest of the world has been thinking. In a stunning public rebuke, she suggested it might finally be time for Prince Harry to swallow his pride, stop aggressively airing his family's personal grievances, and simply phone home to reconnect with his discarded roots. According to a well-placed source, the prince currently exists in a strange, heavily insulated state of denial, allegedly relying on various coping mechanisms just to numb the glaring reality of his rapidly shrinking universe. He is finding out the hard way that one cannot spend years ruthlessly trashing King Charles, Prince William, and Catherine, and still expect to retain the respect of the international public. The oppressive atmosphere of his current existence, trapped in a gilded Californian cage, wealthy but utterly irrelevant, stands in stark, painful contrast to the respected life of duty he so arrogantly walked away from. We have now reached a deeply sobering benchmark. 6 long years since their dramatic exit from the working royal family, providing more than enough evidence to judge this disastrous American experiment a comprehensive failure. As the California sun sets, one must wonder about Harry's late-night inner monologue. Does he quietly yearn for the damp chill of a London morning, feeling the crushing weight of a regret he simply cannot ever admit to his relentlessly ambitious wife? The harsh reality is that the doors of Buckingham Palace remain firmly closed to a man who has proven himself entirely untrustworthy, leaving him isolated on a continent that has fundamentally grown bored of his perpetual victimhood. The permanent consequences of his actions are now painfully clear. There is no triumphant road back to the monarchy, and the promised American dream has slowly curdled into a nightmare of professional exile. It is a tragedy of epic, self-inflicted proportions, and one must ask, would you like me to delve deeper into the specific financial implications of their failing contracts in our next discussion?